So you've just come from an NHS rally ahead of its 70th birthday. What was your main message?
70th birthday, NHS, absolutely brilliant, and I think we should thank all those that founded it and the inspiration that came from working class communities in South Wales and other places. My message was also that health is about mental health, it is about social care, it is about stress, it is about environmental and public health, and that I want to see the NHS properly funded. I want to see an end to the privatisation within the NHS. There are people there from Lancashire who are on strike at the moment, trying to prevent their jobs being essentially outsourced to an internal private company which wouldn't then pay the national conditions. And the need to ensure that social care and mental health are properly resourced. Mental health is the biggest killer of young men in this country, where they take their own lives and commit suicide. And there is a mental health crisis that we've all got to face up to.
So are you saying that austerity could cost lives, effectively?
Austerity does cost lives, no question about that, and the health inequalities in Britain are massive. I mean, take Scotland, for example, which I quoted in my speech. The richest and best off and healthiest in Scotland live 26 years longer than the poorest and those in worst health. Well, that cannot be acceptable. You drive across Glasgow, the life expectancy goes like that across the city. You could say that in almost any other city in Britain. And I do think we have to address those. And also the issues of environmental health. Now, air quality was tackled in the 1950s with the Clean Air Act, which was about smoke. Great. That has gone, but we have far worse substances in the air now, and the air quality in urban areas and the effect on children's health is massive. Children being born and growing up with limited lung capacity. So my message is fund the NHS properly, fund social care properly, and fund mental health properly.
Well, let's talk about the specifics of funding. Theresa May's given the NHS a £20 billion birthday present, 3.4% on average over 5 years. What exactly are you promising?
What we said in the election was we'd put far more money in straight away. Nothing that she has promised actually means any money this year. There's no money for mental health, there's no money for social care, and it's only 0.1% above what the IFS says is necessary to stand still.
So my understanding is you're promising 5% more in the first year, but over 5 years, that's actually less than the Conservative Party, because you're only talking about the first year, they're talking about 5 years, aren't they?
We said we'd put in 5% the first year to deal with the immediate crisis, particularly in hospital waiting lists and in social care.
So what happens after that then?
We would continue increasing at the necessary rate, and it would be higher than that.
And do you know what that is?
Well, it depends on obviously what the requirements are, but we would increase what is necessary for the funding of the NHS, but we'd put that money in for the first year straight away. There's a crisis now. What Theresa May has promised doesn't actually make any difference whatsoever now, this winter, this financial year.
But over 5 years, currently, she's promising more than you.
What she's promising over 5 years is 0.1% above standstill budget. We would offer 2% above.
So you guarantee you'd put more money into the NHS than the Conservative Party?
Absolutely. We would put the money in that's necessary for it, but we would also deal with the other issues which do actually impact on our hospitals, and that particularly is social care and the GP crisis, where there are many older GPs retiring. We're not having enough young GPs coming on, and not enough GPs are coming to work in this country. So
where specifically then would you put the money then? Because this is always a criticism of funding the NHS, isn't it, that you're just pouring money into a leaky bucket, if you like. So where would you direct the money? Well,
I think you direct the money into the crisis of the hospitals at the moment, many of which are in deficit, quite serious deficit, and therefore having real problems managing. Secondly, look at the issues of training and in the NHS for nurses and for doctors particularly, but also crucially the issue of social care, because social care, there's 1 million people in need of social care, can't get it, and the mental health crisis has a knock-on effect in many other areas of life, and so those areas need to be properly funded as well, and that also means funding local government properly.
I'm also keen to talk to you about another big challenge facing politicians at the minute, Brexit. Feels like we can't do an interview, of course, without touching on Brexit. In your opinion, is the problem with Brexit itself or the way the government is handling Brexit?
I think it's the way the government's handled it, because they've never really been very clear what kind of relationship they want with Europe. I mean, every time Philip Hammond says he wants X trade arrangement with Europe, Boris Johnson says he wants a trade agreement with Argentina, with Australia, with Peru, or somebody else, somewhere else. Or you got Liam Fox saying, well, we can fix all these trade deals in a few months, it doesn't matter, they're very easy to negotiate. Well, A, they're not, and B, half of all of our trade is with Europe, and when we've had warnings from very big employers in this country, BMW, Airbus, and many others who are very concerned, because if they can't get their goods in and out, and there is a supply chain that crosses the channel all the time, and if they are having to pay tariffs on those, then clearly they're not going to stay. So there is an issue that there has to be a focus by the government on getting an agreement with the EU. You get the feeling that every time somebody in the government thinks, well, we really should get an agreement, we get cabinet ministers going off in a tangent. And also, the white paper on the objectives, well, goodness, the referendum was 2 years ago, and the white paper is only going to come out after, apparently, a weekend party at Chequers for the cabinet.
So in principle, then, it's not Brexit that you have an issue with, it's the handling of it. Is that right?
I wanted us to reform and remain. That was not the decision of the British people. There was a referendum result. I want us to have a effective relationship with Europe, which gives us the trade opportunities, but also does not set us up as a sort of deregulated economy on the shores of Europe, which is what some Tories want.
So if it's done correctly, do you think that Brexit could actually bring opportunities?
If it's done correctly, we will have a good relationship with Europe. We will be able to give to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland many of the powers that have been of regional government that were taken to them are taken away to Brussels, and we can ensure that we have that good relationship. But I'm also concerned that this government is unclear on environmental protections, unclear on fish agreements, unclear on agriculture, and very unclear on long-term what it does in human rights and universal rights across Europe.
Is there a case for extending the transition, do you think? I'm speaking to Greg Clark, for example, this week. He said that perhaps there is. We
proposed a transition period in the first place. That was a Labour proposal, and that obviously has to be a transition. At the moment, it's not set in stone, but it's talked around about 2 years.
Would you be happy for it to be longer?
I've got a feeling it might go beyond that.
And would you be happy with that?
Yes, because I do think the priority has to be our investment in different parts of Britain to ensure we do get fair economic growth across the whole of the UK, but it also has to be protecting jobs of those industries that rely on trade with Europe, particularly in the Midlands and the North East.
It's interesting speaking to you because you're obviously keen to say that the issues you have with the way the government is handling Brexit very different to how you would do it. But people in your party, members, feel that the issue is with Brexit itself, that it should be stopped. Some people certainly do. Momentum members, for example, thousands of them signing this petition calling for a second referendum. Can you rule out a second referendum? Under your leadership?
That we don't see a second referendum as on our agenda. What we've said is we want Parliament to have the right to a final say and to have an amendable motion on it so we can actually go through what the deal is. The vote 2 weeks ago was not to accept that particular idea, but it will come back to Parliament, and we will keep on with that, and we will, if we're not happy with the final negotiations, we'll vote against them.
I'm still a little bit unclear. You know, you're the sort of straight-talking man of politics, if you like. Are you ruling out a second referendum?
Look, we've not proposed it, we've not supported it, and we're not proposing it now.
So you're ruling it out?
We're not supporting a second referendum.
Okay. I think that's probably as close as I'm going to get to that in that case. Now, another big issue, of course, on Brexit is immigration. It's something that kind of feels that it kind of splits Labour voters on as well. You know, people outside London, for example, lots of working class voters feeling very strongly about immigration, very different opinion to some of your more younger metropolitan supporters. So I'm interested to get to, the gist of where you are on immigration. Do you think that immigration is too high?
Well, it's going down all the time, so I'm very surprised you even asked the question. It's gone down a great deal over the past
Well, I'm asking the question because for many people who I've spoken to outside London, they say that that's why they voted to leave the EU.
Yeah, I would ask you to also recognise that with those that have come to this country to work here, we've kept our services going, particularly health and social care services. Where I think there is a problem is the way in which employers have brought in groups of workers deliberately to undercut people working in this country in construction, but in other industries as well. And my argument with many of the governments of Central Europe was they should support protection of rights and pay levels right across Europe.
Now, I'm interested in asking you about some social issues as well. One thing that's been in the news a lot recently is the decriminalisation of cannabis for medical reasons. You've said that that's something that you support. So I'm interested to know do you feel that there's an argument that cannabis should be decriminalised across the board?
I think at this stage we should say medical use of cannabis is good, and cannabis oil used is clearly beneficial to people, and that should be decriminalised and made readily available as quickly as possible.
How about more widely? Do you feel that the recreational use of cannabis should be decriminalised?
Well, I think we have to look at the health concerns of any drug that people take. No drug is without consequences when people take it. And personally, I don't take any drugs at all. And I think we should just think about it quite carefully, but let's go with what's proposed now, which is the availability of cannabis for medicinal purposes.
Back in 2000, you signed an early day motion calling for the possession of cannabis to be decriminalised. Have you changed your mind?
No, I think criminalising people for possession of small amounts of cannabis is not particularly a good idea and does lead to great difficulties, particularly for younger people in communities like mine. And so I do think the debate is moving on.
How about the sex industry? Is there an argument that there should be a decriminalisation there?
I don't think people that are mainly women that are working in the sex industry should be criminalised for working in it. I think those that are benefiting from it, they are the ones that we should go after on this. And so I do look at what's being done in Sweden and in other places on this. But I do think there are women who are being criminalised and because they've been into prostitution and grotesquely exploited, they're not criminals, they're victims.
How about people who buy sex? Because if you're mentioning the Nordic model, that's slightly different from the UK, isn't it? Because if you buy sex, that's a criminal offence.
Well, the Nordic model essentially moves the blame and the responsibility onto those promoting the sex industry rather than those that are working in it. And I think that's a direction that we should think about going.
Because part of the reason that one of the reasons I was quite interested in asking your opinion on this is because there's reports back in 2016 that you told students at Goldsmiths University that I'm in favour of decriminalising the sex industry. So you're only saying the women, not the men, is that right?
What I meant and said was that the women who are working in the industry should not be criminalised for doing so.
Definitely. And then I can't, of course, have any interview at the minute without asking about the World Cup.
The World Cup?
Lots of our viewers will be very interested in it at the minute. Have you managed to catch any games?
Yes. Yes, quite a lot of them actually. I enjoy football. I enjoy watching football, both at my favourite club Arsenal, but also I enjoy watching young people's football in my own area. My family are very involved in football, and watching youngsters join football clubs, get involved in games, building that sense of team spirit and understanding they've got to rely on each other to achieve something and understanding the highs and lows and disappointments, I think at its best is absolutely brilliant. And yeah, the World Cup is a great time for us all. I'm
going to bring back another early day motion that you signed on the World Cup. This one was from the Euro '96, perhaps the last time when England did quite well in a kind of international football tournament.
Well, that was when we had the best song, perhaps, It's Coming Home, but unfortunately it didn't.
Maybe better like this
but
time.
It was a great song.
So the motion that you signed said that you deplored the jingoism and nationalism in the tabloid press, which does nothing to maintain the true spirit of sport, but is reminiscent of Hitler's use of sport to enhance his evil regime. So some pretty strong words there about some of the coverage of Euro '96. Do you think some of the coverage has gone a bit far this time?
I think it tends to get a bit overboard sometimes. I mean, it is a game, it is football, it is sport, and be passionate about it. But remember that there's a lot of teams that are not there that would love to be there. A lot of people love the World Cup all over the world for that. Now, I think we should do our best, support our team. Let's hope they go as far as they possibly can. But above all, enjoy the football. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the World Cup 1966, also to remember those magnificent Brazilian teams that won successive World Cups. I mean, you couldn't just be anything but mesmerised by the skill and the intricate passing and all this. And it was like poetry.
So
football is poetry. Read Albert Camus on football. He's your man.
I'll have to look it up. So
look it up. He's very good.
So perhaps
he talks about the psychology of it, but the psychology of sport and people and politics and culture is something that I find quite interesting. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to read C.L.R. James' book, Beyond a Boundary. It's about cricket in the Caribbean. People in the Caribbean playing cricket in a colonial atmosphere and beating the colonial master. Great book.
I'll have to check that one
out.
Check
it out. C.L.R. James, Beyond a Boundary.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jeremy Corbyn getting quite animated, though, about the World Cup. Well, after